Welcome to Punky's World. This is the review of the Season 5 premiere of Dark Side of the Ring. The Ballad of John Earthquake Tenta. John Tenta was a good man. One of those gentle giants, big 6 foot, 7 inch, 400-pound living, breathing teddy bear. He met his wife. I think he was doing sumo or something when he met her. And she's from the Philippines. She had a child whom he adopted as his own. And they had 2 children together. Joanna and John. They, growing up in the locker room, they would call John Lil Quake, or Little Quake. I'm not sure if it's a Lil Quake or a Little Quake, but either way, that was his nickname in the locker room. So, he went into sumo. He was actually very good. But his heart was in professional wrestling. Actually, sumo is legitimate, okay? In the sense that they're not predetermined, like professional wrestling is, but he just, I don't know if he wanted the entertainment aspect or what he wanted, but he wanted to be in wrestling, like professional wrestling. So, which at his size was not a difficult task to achieve. And so I don't know exactly how he transitioned from sumo to wrestling, but excuse me, but he did. And at some point, Wrestling Federation came calling. Now, he met his wife, while he was in sumo, in early mid-80s. And at some point, the World Wrestling Federation came calling once he transitioned to professional wrestling. He was from Canada. And he had settled his family there. It was a tough transition for his wife, because it was a completely different life for her. And her English was, she spoke English. She was actually a singer. She sang in clubs and stuff. That's how they met. She was singing in a club in Japan. She was Filipino, and she was singing in a club in Japan. And matter of fact, she sang on the show. She has an incredible voice. And anyway, so like I said, he settled his family in Canada and began wrestling in Canada and stuff. And, you know, for someone that size, it didn't take long for the World Wrestling Federation to come calling, especially, in the late 80s. So they came calling, and they called him out of the crowd. They did a plant thing where they called him out of the crowd and had him squished in one. He was supposed to sit on the guy's back while the guy did push-ups or something, and he squashed him. And ended up with Jimmy Hart. At some point during that, early on, they decided he needed a tag team partner. And there was another fairly large wrestler, not quite as tall as him, but, big, that they were bringing in. And they said, we're going to call you the Natural Disasters. This guy was Fred Ottman, another big, gentle giant. Neither guy drank. They didn't do drugs. They didn't party. They just, he said, we'd shoot it. Just add a she sound at the front. In the hotel room and play cards and whatnot, because we just didn't go and party with the other guys. This is what Fred was talking about. And it's pretty much confirmed that that's the case. And because it just wasn't what they were into. They were both family men. And Fred became known as Typhoon. Jake Roberts, he was funny. He basically said, an earthquake and a typhoon, that is not good weather. Something along those lines. He was joking about the weather, because obviously an earthquake and a typhoon. Although an earthquake is technically not a weather phenomenon. It is a natural phenomenon, but an earthquake is not weather. Technically speaking. It is a natural disaster, as is a typhoon, but and for those of you who don't know, a typhoon's an earthquake. Not an earthquake, I'm sorry. Go back. What I was saying was an earthquake is not weather, but they are both natural disasters. A typhoon is a hurricane, but it goes in the opposite direction. In the southern hemisphere, they do not call it a hurricane. They call it a typhoon because it spins in the opposite direction. If you've ever been to the southern hemisphere, their toilets flush in the opposite direction. Drains drain in the opposite direction. It has to do with the earth. But anyway, so that's the difference. But yeah. So Fred became Typhoon, he became, then he was Earthquake, and they became a pretty dominant tag team for obvious reasons. And they were under the tutelage of Jimmy Hart. As Gorilla Monsoon used to say, under the tutelage of. And for those of you who don't know what that word means, it's under the tutoring or teaching of. Technically, that's what that means. It means, well, I think what he was saying, under the eye of, under the watch of, you know, learning from, that's why he says tutelage, because that's literally what it means, under the tutoring of, under the learning of. And I'm not saying anybody's dumb by telling you what that means. I didn't know it right away either. My father sort of explained, and it makes sense because the root word is tutor. So that makes sense, right? Tutor means teach. So, but Gorilla Monsoon had a tendency to use larger, more complicated phraseology than a lot of other people did. Like, he would say the occipital protuberance. Okay. Has to do with head. It's actually the bump right above your neck. You know, that bump that you have, the natural bump in the head. It's the occipital protuberance. Protuberance means bump. The reason that he would do that, by the way, wasn't to be a jerk, actually. Well, it was to educate, but it was also because he was educated. Gorilla Monsoon actually had a degree in biology, I believe. I believe his degree is something along that vein. But anyway, that's nothing to do with him, but you know, we're talking about the natural disasters. And but anyway, they teamed up. Excuse me. And Fred had a tragedy in his family. Had to go home for a while to run his outside of wrestling businesses. He ran nightclubs and stuff. When his brother-in-law, I don't know his wife's brother or sister's husband or what it was, but was murdered outside of their club. Because he was doing, you know, the footwork at home so that Fred could wrestle. And it was awful. And so he was murdered, shot to death. So Fred had to go home and run things and get things straightened out. When Fred came back, they had a new idea for him. Fred became Tugboat. Ooh! And ended up teaming with Hogan. Well, at some point, John had left wrestling and started doing other jobs. I remember people talking about when he was working in the big and tall department, obviously. The big and tall department. If you're going to work in retail and you're the size of John Tenta, how do you want to work in big and tall? Again, he was about 6'6", 6'7", hovering around the 400-pound range. And he was selling clothing, but he wasn't happy doing that, although I'm sure he was good at it, you know, because he was a very personable person, and you know, he was soft-spoken, he was kind. And if you was selling to other big and tall men, there's no intimidation factor. So I'm sure that he probably did fine at it. It just wasn't feeding his family in the way he wanted to be feeding his family. So he got his CDL and became a truck driver, which was a decent paying job. And unfortunately, though, it is a traveling job, just like wrestling. And being on the road, he started noticing, I'm going to assume there was some pain in his bladder, based on the dramatization of him down on the ground, holding his abdomen with his mouth open as if he's in pain, you know. It's like this dramatization that they did. When they were talking about the fact that he was urinating blood clots. Well, that's never good. Um, but he didn't say anything because he wanted to take care of his family. He wanted to, listening to that and listening to how he would be, he worked and he wanted to work and he didn't, and he was going to take care of his family. Just it reminded me of my dad. My dad basically worked himself to death. So I get where those kids are coming from in terms of that, because my father worked himself to death, basically. So even though my father was actually 73 years old, it's still too young. Most of the people, a lot of the people he went to school with are still here. They're 80. He'll be 80 in a few weeks. Anyway. John was only 43. They were able to arrest the cancer once. Once he finally said to his wife, something's not right. And they went to the doctor together. And the doctor said, you have a baseball-sized tumor in your bladder. The heck have you been? As far as you should have maybe sought help sooner. It's also possible that by the time that pain and bleeding started, the tumor was already pretty large, and that they might not have gotten to it on time or whatever. I don't know exactly how bladder cancer works. I do know that I think it's aggressive in the sense of the way that it spreads. The quickness at which it grows. I could be wrong there, but I have a family member who was an RN, God rest her soul, who died of bladder cancer. And I remember when she was dying, talking to her, and she said, nurses, we don't make the best patients. That's an old thing. That nurses and doctors don't make the best patients, because they do tend to put things off because they kind of know. But it's an old saying, nurses don't make the best patients. And it's true. And stubborn middle-aged men don't make such good patients either. I do think you're a better patient if you've been a patient since you were young, Like me. I listen to my body because I have been a patient, whether it's been throughout my childhood for all sorts of things, or because I was in and out of the hospital from the time I was born until I was about 6. So then I had a time where I was healthy, but if I did get like a little cold, I ended up with full-blown pneumonia, because my immune system was never right. So I knew when I was coming down with a cold, like in high school, and I would fight, I knew I was going to end up home from school for a week. But I hated that in high school, because obviously then you have a bunch of catching up to do, which is not fun in high school. But anyway, in elementary school it's a little bit different. But in high school, a lot of catching up to do. Anyway, so if you're someone who's been in and out of doctor's offices your whole life, like I have, then I got cancer twice and all of those things, you know, and having been through therapies, you know, for other physical problems and stuff like that, you tend to listen to your body a little bit more because you've been taught to, more or less. Your body has taught you from the time you were very little, listen to me. Whereas if you're 43 years old, you've always been healthy, you might ignore your body at first. So, I'm not giving anybody a hard time here. I'm just saying that we as human beings tend to ignore our bodies. Unless we've spent our lifetime with our bodies hitting us over the head, so we can't ignore our bodies. So, anyway, so he thought maybe if he had been wrestling, the wrestling doctors might have caught it sooner or something. At any rate, he, like I said, they arrested the cancer once. And he found out that it came back right before his son's wedding, and that it had spread everywhere. They had told him it was terminal the first time. So, but I remember when people would talk about seeing him in the big and tall section, and a lot of people were sad, you know, but and I remember people talking about, we had a special message board for him, and over on one of the, I want to say it was over on Russell Crab, if I'm not mistaken, and he would come on and talk to us when he was undergoing treatment and stuff, and this was, you know, back almost 20 years ago, because he died 18 years, wow, he died 18 years ago, but anyway, and he would come on and talk to us when he was feeling up to it and stuff. So, and his family would come on when he was really sick and when he passed. So we had, you know, updates regularly, those of us who were part of that group. So it was different watching it, you know, because it was something that played out in real time for me. And it was funny because they talked about, you know, earthquake and typhoon. They talked a little bit about Fred and what he went on to do after that. He went to WCW. Well, first they made him Tugboat. And they had both gone to WCW at one point, and John became the Shark or some ridiculous. And then he came back and they made him Golga. It was ridiculous. Should have been Earthquake, but anyway. There were ways to turn an Earthquake if they brought him, when they brought in the oddities. Instead of making him Golga, if they had just plain brought in Earthquake, they could have made Earthquake a babyface. Especially John. You know, a babyface easily. You know, there would have been ways to do that. So, yeah. And I was thinking about that as I was watching the whole thing. Like, they could have turned him babyface and they would have made Jillians. I don't even know if a Jillian is an actual number. Let me know in the comments, would you? But anyway, and they talked about Fred, Typhoon, Tugboat, coming into WCW as well, and how neither of their characters in WCW were terrible, from a shark to the Shock Master. I was laughing so hard I was crying. Because they were showing the Shockmaster's debut, where he was supposed to come through the wall and be Sting and Lex Luger's partner and be this big guy. And I remembered when they said it, the voice was Ole Anderson, sort of. It was Ole, but it was Ole making a deeper voice. I mean, Ole already had that voice, God rest his soul, but they couldn't have Fred do it because it wouldn't have worked. Wouldn't have been very intimidating. So, and you hear Ric Flair say, "Oh my God," or something like that, as Fred comes through the wall, and the bottom part of the wall didn't break. So he fell forward over the bottom part of the wall, dropping the ridiculous gimmick tin foil looking mask that had two tiny pinholes to see out of, which were not they weren't good enough. But I don't remember the word I was going to use. They weren't adequate. That's the word I was going to use. Weren't adequate to see through, and plunk. He picks up the... Oh, man. I mean, I saw it live the first time, but, you know, and this is right at the beginning of where the internet was really getting involved, and we all knew at the time that it was only talking. And oh, it was a disaster. Fred just laughs at it now, but it was an utter disaster at the time. And you notice the camera didn't look at Sting and Luger, because the looks on their faces must have been absolute horror, because you could hear Ric Flair, because it was on a Flair for the Gold. It was oh gosh, it was a disaster. And you can hear Booker T in the background. He fell on his arse. Oh boy, well no, he didn't actually. He fell on his face. But so, and they showed it to Meng and to Jake Roberts, and they were both laughing so hard I was cry laughing, because neither one of them had actually seen the clip. You can find it on YouTube, I'm sure, guys. Anyway, when he died, he was holding his daughter's hand, going back to John. And there's definitely a earthquake-sized hole in that family. I think the best part, and I'm getting down to where my battery's going to die, was that at the end, the family was kind of all together, and they had his old earthquake costume, which apparently is in two pieces, and they were holding it up over his daughter, and she was kind of smiling and laughing, and they were holding it up in front of her, you know, and it's like 800 times her size. That was sweet. It was sweet to see the old earthquake costume and see the kids with it and stuff. Hall of Fame. That's all I'm going to say there. Hall of Fame. So, anyway. And no wrestlers showed up at his funeral. Okay, we're at 30%, guys. Which is unreal. I'm sorry. Where was Jimmy Hart? Where was Hulk Hogan? I would imagine that Fred was there, but he was like his best friend. So, but where was Jimmy Hart? Where was Hulk Hogan? Where was Vince McMahon? Why didn't the Federation send flowers? I remember at the time people being very angry about that. Fans like myself. So I want to thank you so much. I want to say this was an A++ show. Next week, quick preview, it will be Marcus Alexander Buff Bagwell Um, that should be a trip. Um, so I will, and I'll share a story that I have in a book, actually, from a ring announcer about Buff Bagwell next week. So hold on to your britches for that. That's pants, by the way. Thank you guys so much. God bless you. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'll see you for cooking. Bye, guys.